44. The Bhagavad Gita. Give up your unmanliness and get up and fight. This self-pity and self-indulgence are unbecoming of the great soul you are. Krishna to Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the holiest and most sublime books that exists on planet Earth. If I were told that I had to get rid of all books but one, I would save the Bhagavad Gita. It is really the book of books. Sai Baba has called it the cream of the Upanishads, the wisdom teachings of the Vedas. It is the sublime story of Sri Bhagavan Krishna and his disciple, Arjuna. Krishna is the Christ of the Eastern world and, in reality, is the Christ of the Western world, too, because Krishna is none other than the Lord Maitreya, the planetary Christ. He is the teacher of teachers, for he is the head of the Great White Brotherhood and the spiritual hierarchy. This great teacher and leader is here again as he was 7,000 years ago as Krishna and 2,000 years ago as the being who overshadowed Jesus. Now he is physically incarnated in London, England. He is the world teacher that all religions have been waiting for. The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's sublime teachings to Arjuna as expressed by Vyasa. It is interesting to note that the soul that was Arjuna was later Vyasa and subsequently incarnated as Gautama Buddha. So the Bhagavad Gita is the story of the relationship between the Lord Maitreya and Gautama Buddha. The Lord Maitreya, according to the channelings of the Tibetan Foundation, is the highest being ever to graduate from this planetary school. He isn't the highest being ever to have come here but is the highest to graduate. In his life as Krishna more than 7,000 years ago, he attained his 5th initiation. In his life overshadowing Jesus, he took his ascension, or 6th initiation. Who better to teach the wisdom of the ages than Lord Maitreya and Gautama Buddha? Lord Maitreya was the teacher of Jesus, Kuthumi, El Morya, Saint Germain, Hilarion, Serapis Bey, and many other great masters. He is the teacher of both angels and men. In the Bhagavad Gita, he is humanity's teacher. The Bhagavad Gita is part of a larger book called the Mahabharata, which is the story of a great war. It is against the backdrop of this great battle between two armies that Krishna teaches the science of liberation and God realization. The actual meaning of Bhagavad Gita is Song of God. The two opposing armies are the divine nature and the demonic nature with which all must come to terms and master. Arjuna, as the unfolding incarnated soul, is being pulled in opposite directions by his higher and lower natures, which is crippling him both spiritually and psychologically. The story begins with Arjuna, who is the leader of the divine army, falling into despondency and depression because he doesn't want to fight the demonic army since he knows many of them personally. Arjuna has been overcome by Maya, illusion, glamour, and negative ego. The Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's attempt to awaken Arjuna to the reality and perspective of his eternal self. The wisdom teachings of Sri Bhagavan Krishna. The first lesson Krishna teaches is that the wise person does not grieve for the living or the dead because the indweller of the body is none other than the eternal self. The eternal self is never born and never dies. It is unborn and changeless. It cannot be killed, even if the body is slain. When the physical body is worn out, it puts on a new one, like a new set of clothes. Weapons cannot hurt it, nor fire burn it, nor water drown it. The eternal self is invulnerable, indestructible, and immortal. The true yogi lives in a state of transcendence of duality, or transcendence of the pairs of opposites. What this means is that the true yogi lives in even-mindedness and equanimity whether he or she is experiencing pleasure or pain, profit or loss, victory or defeat, criticism or praise, cold or heat. The yogi stands detached from all greed and attachment. As Arjuna was to say later in his incarnation as the Buddha, all suffering comes from attachment. The yogi remains in a state of unconditional love, joy, and inner peace at all times, regardless of what is going on outside of himself. This state of equilibrium is called yoga. One of the key teachings of the Bhagavad Gita that is repeated over and over again is that a person has a tremendous need to perform his duty and service in life without being attached to the fruits of his actions. In other words, taking action in life is essential, but it must not be taken to achieve some kind of material or spiritual reward. Action is taken out of duty, for a mission, and in worship of God who lives in all humans, plants, and animals as the eternal self. The true yogi sees the eternal self in all beings and all forms. Action without attachment to results is yoga. A true knower of the self casts away all material desire and is satisfied only by the eternal self. The yogi has no craving for pleasure and is free from passion, fear, and anger. He has total mastery of his physical body, emotions, mind, intellect, and 5 senses. Intuitional awareness cannot be obtained without self-control. All desire for pleasure, power, and the acquiring and hoarding of material objects is removed. All selfish attachment is removed. The yogi is free from lust and has control over his sexuality. The yogi is neither elated by good fortune nor depressed by bad fortune. He is totally free from attachment and aversion to people and things. The yogi has been released from the ego cage of I, me, and mine. The path to self-realization is one of renunciation of the above-mentioned negative qualities, not renunciation of acting in life. The yogi lives in this world but is not of this world. The yogi fights the holy fight and lives as a spiritual warrior, thinking only of the eternal self and incurring no sin. There are 2 paths to self-realization: Jnana Yoga, the contemplative path of spiritual wisdom, and Karma Yoga, the active path of selfless service. Both of these paths lead to Brahma, God. Every selfless act is born from Brahma, just as every selfish act leads away from him. Through devotion to selfless work in service of humanity, you attain the supreme goal of life. It is better for a person to perform his or her own dharma, path, imperfectly than to try to perform another person's perfectly. Each person must find his own dharma and not compare or compete with others. Desire and anger are seen by Krishna as the all-consuming, all-polluting enemy of the world. Desire is the destroyer of wisdom and discrimination. Senses are superior to the body. The mind is superior to the senses. The intelligence is superior to the mind. Superior even to the intelligence is the eternal self. The ego has one belief: I am the doer. The reality is that there is no separate I outside of the eternal self. The Bhagavad Gita states, "Perform all actions for my sake." Krishna, the eternal self, completely absorbed in the self and without expectations. Fight, but stay free from the fever of the ego. When a person lets himself be run by his senses, he is conditioned to be attracted to the pleasant and to have aversion to the unpleasant. The true yogi living in the consciousness of the eternal self does his duty and remains the same. The yogi lives in contentment regardless of what comes. The yogi lets the Atma, eternal self, rule the ego and slay selfish desire. It is through humility, self-inquiry, and service that the yogi is led to those who will impart great knowledge. The true yogi is fearless, devoted, and free from envy and all self-doubts. He knows himself and others as the divine self and not just as separate physical bodies. The yogi is free from all sense of expectation and all sense of possession. The mind is fixed on knowledge and all work is performed in the spirit of service. Brahman is attained by those who see Brahma in every action. The true sannyasin, renunciate, neither hates nor desires. He or she is free from the pairs of opposites. The self is seen as one with all other selves. All deeds are performed as an offering to God. A person of knowledge looks with equal eye on a Brahmin priest, a cow, an elephant, a dog, an outcast. The Eternal One is essentially the same in all. The knower of the Eternal doesn't rejoice on meeting pleasant experiences nor grieve on meeting unpleasant experiences. The person who withstands the impulses originating from lust and anger is a true yogi and a happy person. The yogi's only desire is for liberation and self-realization. The true yogi is unaffected by likes and dislikes and the bondage of self-will. The goals of knowledge and service are unified. The yogi is free from delusion and not dependent on any external support. The true yogi is filled with wisdom and knowledge and looks at a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold as the same. All are just incarnations of God, and the yogi sees beyond all appearances. The yogi has an equal regard for friends, companions, enemies, neutral people, hateful people, relatives, saints, and sinners. The yogi has an iron will that is used to abolish self-will. Will, or personal power, is used only in service of the eternal self. Krishna very much preached the middle way. In one passage he says, "He who eats too much, he who fasts too much or sleeps too much or too little cannot perform yoga." Krishna taught the ideal of moderation in recreation, effort, actions, sleep, and wakefulness. The yogi's mind is calm, passions are stilled, and he has attained purity. He realizes that he is within all beings and all beings are within himself. The supreme yogi feels the pains and joys of all beings as if they were his own joys and pains. The yogi has trained his mind to rest only in the eternal self. Krishna says that among thousands of men and women, hardly one strives for perfection, and of these successful strivers, only one really knows him. The eternal self is the Om. Krishna has delineated 4 types of virtuous people who seek God: the person in distress, the person seeking knowledge, the person seeking wealth, and the person aspiring to wisdom. All 4 types are seen as virtuous, but the person seeking wisdom is the most virtuous. The person of wisdom has a steadfast mind and is focused on the eternal self as his supreme goal. The eternal self resides within all forms of God and religion. At the time of leaving the body upon death, or sleep, a person will travel to the last thought in his mind. Therefore, the yogi keeps his mind on God at all times so that it is to God he will go when he dies. At the time of departure he says the word Om, so he will enter the highest path. Krishna says the eternal self is easily attainable by a steadfast yogi whose mind is fixed on the eternal self and who constantly remembers the eternal self. This is attained by complete devotion to God. The eternal self is easily attained by those who are attached to nothing but the eternal self. There are 2 paths in life, one leads to liberation and the other to rebirth. Choose whom ye shall serve. The ignorant cannot see the eternal self when it inhabits a human form, but the yogi, seeing beyond form, has the eyes to see and the ears to hear. The eternal self is embodied in His Holiness, the Lord Sai Baba, but many are fooled by his seeming normal actions of walking around in an average-looking physical body. It is through constant striving, firmness, an undivided mind, and unbroken vows that the self is attained. The true yogi worships the eternal self in all beings. The eternal self does not find favor or disfavor in any being. Even the greatest sinner who begins to worship is counted as righteous. No devotee is ever rejected. Those who worship and meditate on the eternal self without any other thought will have their needs provided for. Those who fail to realize the true nature of the eternal self must be reborn. It is through single-minded devotion that one can see the self and enter into the self and become the self. Those who worship the self with a fixed mind and with faith and courage, and those who are steadfast, are perfect yogis. They are totally devoted to the welfare of all beings. All actions are performed as if they were being performed for God. This is the path to perfection. The true yogi never hurts any person or creature in the world and is never hurt by the world. The true yogi is modest, sincere, harmless, forgiving, straightforward, balanced in the mind in favorable and unfavorable conditions, free from pride and deceit, gentle, upright, pure, filled with inner strength, detached from sense objects. The true yogi does not get compulsively entangled, even in his home and family. He enjoys solitude, not following the crowd. Some realize the self through the practice of meditation, some through the path of wisdom, some through the path of service, and some through all three paths practiced in integration and balance. The three gunas. Krishna has put forth a fantastic model for understanding oneself and other people. He has divided the qualities that make up the phenomenal world into three categories, called gunas: the sattvic, the rajasic, and the tamasic. The sattvic quality has to do with law, harmony, purity, and goodness; the rajasic with energy and passion; the tamasic with inertia and ignorance. The ideal is to be sattvic, although, in truth, the eternal self is beyond all three qualities of energy. Even the sattvic nature can become negative if it becomes attached to happiness and wisdom. The rajasic nature binds through the passion arising from selfish desire and attachment. The tamasic nature binds through ignorance, indolence, and sleep. In essence, the sattvic person finds happiness, the rajasic person finds action, the tamasic person finds distorted understanding and delusion. When the sattvic quality predominates in a person's personality, the light of wisdom shines. When the rajasic quality predominates, a person pursues selfishness and greedy purposes. When the tamasic quality predominates, a person lives in darkness, slothfulness, and confusion. Dying with a sattvic nature, the yogi attains the pure worlds of the wise. Those dying in a rajasic state are reborn among people driven to work. Those dying in a tamasic state are conceived in the wombs of the ignorant. In my understanding, the sattvic nature is balanced, the rajasic nature is too yang, and the tamasic nature is too yin. The rajasic nature might be looked at as being the top dog, or superiority complex, while the tamasic nature might be considered the underdog, or inferiority complex. This is very simplified, but it might be helpful in putting Krishna's system into perspective. The fruit of good deeds is sattvic, suffering is rajasic, ignorance and insensitivity are tamasic. The sattvic quality brings understanding, the rajasic brings greed, and the tamasic brings confusion, infatuation, and ignorance. The sattvic quality goes upward, the rajasic quality remains the same, and the tamasic quality sinks downward. The true yogi ultimately goes beyond the three gunas, feeling no aversion when the forces are active nor any craving when the forces subside. The yogi remains impartial and undisturbed by the action of the gunas. The yogi does not vacillate but when dealing with form manifests the sattvic nature. Such a one is fit for union with Brahman. The yogi avoids malice, lack of morals, insatiable desires, scheming, anxiety, hoarding money, hypocrisy, arrogance, conceit, cruelty, harshness, self-glorification, a fragmented mind, obstinance, violence, demonic, evil thoughts, impure motives, stubbornness, and the intoxication of wealth. According to Krishna, the gate that leads to hell is built of lust, anger, and greed. Sattvic people enjoy food that is mild, tasty, substantial, agreeable, and nourishing and that promotes health, strength, cheerfulness, and longevity. Rajasic people like food that is salty, bitter, hot, sour, and spicy and that promotes pain, discomfort, and disease. Tamasic people like overcooked food that has lost its taste and nutritional value. Sattvic people perform sacrifices without thought of reward. Rajasic people perform sacrifices for the sake of show and for the goodwill it will bring to them. Tamasic people perform sacrifices but ignore both the letter and the spirit of the law. Krishna states that the disciplines of the body are to offer service to the gods, to the good, to the wise, and to your spiritual teacher, and to be pure, honest, continent, and nonviolent. The disciplines of speech are to offer soothing words, to speak truly, kindly, and helpfully, and to study the scriptures. The disciplines of the mind are calmness, gentleness, silence, self-restraint, and purity. When these three levels of discipline are practiced without attachment to results and in the spirit of great faith, the sages call the practice sattvic. Giving simply because it is right to give, without thought of return, is sattvic. Giving with regrets or expectations of receiving something in return is rajasic. Giving at an inappropriate time, in inappropriate circumstances, or without affection or respect is tamasic. Self-sacrifice, giving, self-discipline, and taking responsibility for one's life and world are sattvic. Avoiding action out of fear of difficulty or physical discomfort is rajasic. The sattvic person is not intimidated by unpleasant work, nor does he seek a job because it is pleasant. The true yogi does what God guides him or her to do and remains even-minded and not attached to the results. Those who renounce selfish desire and the desire for personal reward go beyond the reach of karma. Sattvic knowledge sees the eternal self in all beings. Rajasic knowledge sees all people and animals as separate. Tamasic knowledge sees one small part and mistakes it for the whole. A sattvic worker is free of egotism and selfish attachment, is full of enthusiasm, and has fortitude in success and failure alike. A rajasic worker has strong personal desires, wants rewards for his actions, and is easily swept away by good or bad fortune. The tamasic worker is undisciplined, vulgar, stubborn, deceitful, dishonest, lazy, depressed, and prone to procrastination. The sattvic intellect knows when to act and when to refrain from action, and knows what brings freedom and what brings bondage. The rajasic intellect confuses right and wrong actions and cannot distinguish what is to be done from what should not be done. The tamasic intellect is clouded in darkness and has utterly reversed right and wrong. The true yogi is ever joyful and beyond the reach of desire and sorrow. The yogi has become united with Brahman and has equal regard for every living creature. The yogi has abandoned all outer supports and looks totally to God for protection. The yogi shares his wisdom only with those with whom it is appropriate to do so. Those who teach the supreme mystery of the Bhagavad Gita teach it to all who love God and perform the greatest act of love. Krishna's declaration to Arjuna and Arjuna's response. As Arjuna began to become awakened from the delusion of his ego, Krishna said to him, "Get up. Give up your unmanliness and get up and fight. This self-pity and self-indulgence are unbecoming of the great soul that you are." He is speaking to everyone. Arjuna did get up and he continued to listen to and absorb Krishna's teaching. Finally, at the end of Krishna's teaching, Arjuna said, "My delusion is dissolved. I have become aware of my reality, which is God." 45. The Vedas, God's revelation. If one fails to realize Brahman, God, in this life before the physical sheath is shed, he must again put on a body in the world of embodied creatures. The Vedas. The Hindus have received their religion as a direct revelation from God. No human author is credited with the work, as is the case in most other religions, because no human wrote the Vedas. His Holiness, the Lord Sai Baba, has said that the Vedas came as a direct result of the hearing of the divine sounds of God by the rishis, the seers and prophets of ancient India. The Vedas are the scriptures in which this divine knowledge was written down. The term Veda comes from the root word that means to know. When it is applied to scripture, it means book of knowledge. The Hindu religion based upon the Vedas is by far the oldest of all the major religions. The Vedas are the earliest testaments to the victory of man over himself in discovering the underlying unity of all creation. Sai Baba has called the Vedas the breath of God. They have no describable origin for, in truth, they are timeless. They lead the seeker on the path to the realm of eternal bliss where no birth or death exists. The Vedas have also been referred to as Sabda Brahma, the sound of the universal absolute. The Vedas are the philosopher's stone that turns all metals into gold, all students into aspirants, and all aspirants into sages. They are to be studied reverently and practiced in daily life, for they are the embodiment of truth. Recitation of the Vedas purifies the environment and strengthens the will to be true. Sai Baba says that every syllable of the Vedas is a name of God and that they are the source of all scripture. The Vedas are not just for the people of India but are for all the people of the earth. They enable the human to see a vision of the Lord. They are eternal messages from God caught by developed consciousness in the silence of meditation. The Vedas are divided into 4 great books: the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. Each Veda consists of 4 parts: the mantra samhitas, or hymns, the brahmanas, or explanations of mantras and rituals, the aranyakas, and the Upanishads. The 4 subdivisions of the Vedas are symbolic of the 4 stages in a person's life. The essence of the Vedas is that which is present everywhere and manifests itself under all circumstances as the eternal self. This self lives in all people, animals, plants, minerals, and objects in the world. There is nothing but the self. The purpose of being here is to realize your identity as the self and to serve the self in all beings and things. You are here to learn discrimination so you can identify with that which is permanent rather than impermanent. You are here to recognize that God is one, not two. Immortality, or liberation, can be won only through renunciation of the material world. You must learn to live in the world but not be of the world. This can be achieved only through the development of non-attachment, self-control, and mastery over your thoughts, feelings, physical body, sexuality, and senses, and over your identification with physical vision, or appearances. The essence of the Vedas is love and that all men are brothers. The philosophy of the Vedas is known as Vedanta. Vedanta is merging with the Om, which leads to Veda, knowledge, Anta, end. Vedanta, hence, is the end of knowledge, which is liberation, self-realization, and immortality. Vedanta means the final product of the fund of knowledge that leads to liberation from the wheel of rebirth. Vedanta teaches that the mind can lead you either into the prison of petty desire or into the vastness of spiritual realization. Vedanta is wisdom that leads to release from the bondage of the material world. It is based on the knowledge of the self. It is through right living, balanced living, and unconditional love that you achieve the bliss of God realization. The wisdom of the Vedas is the supreme attainment that can be earned in life, for it leads to realizing the self. The Upanishads. The Upanishads are the most important sections of the Vedas. They contain the essence of the Vedas. Few books on planet Earth are as soul-inspiring. The Upanishads are the products of the highest wisdom, the supreme divine knowledge. They provide a detailed description of the nature of the eternal self and Atman. They teach methods of attaining Brahman, God. The Upanishads are eternal and come directly from Brahman. They serve as a means of freedom from earthly bondage. Knowledge of the Upanishads allows you to attain self-realization and merge with Brahman. It is this self-realization alone that can eliminate ignorance and restore immortality, eternal peace, and bliss. Only knowledge of Brahman can remove sorrow, illusion, and pain. It is only through discrimination, detachment, self-control, and a deep yearning for liberation that Brahman and self-realization can be obtained. The term Upanishad actually means secret teachings or secret doctrine. Instead of trying to explain the Upanishads myself, I have looked through the Upanishads in the 4 sections of the Vedas and chosen some of my favorite stanzas for your enjoyment and spiritual edification. The translation of these quotations is from a book called The Upanishads by Eknath Easwaran, A book I would highly recommend if you are desirous of doing more spiritual study in this area. Quotations from the Upanishads. Everything is loved not for its own sake, but because the self lives in it. This self has to be realized. Hear about this self and meditate upon him. When you hear about the self, meditate upon the self, and finally realize the self, you come to understand everything in life. Separateness arises from identifying the self with the body, which is made up of elements. When this physical identification dissolves, there can be no more separate self. As a great fish swims between the banks of a river as it likes, so does the sinning self move between the states of dreaming and waking. The self is free from desire, free from evil, and free from fear. The self is, indeed, Brahman, but through ignorance people identify it with intellect, mind, senses, passions, and the elements of earth, air, fire, water, and space. This is why the self is said to consist of this and that and appears to be everything. As a person acts, so he becomes in life. Those who do good become good. Those who do harm become bad. Good deeds make one pure. Bad deeds make one impure. So we are said to be what our desire is, so is our will. As our will is, so are our acts. As we act, so do we become. We live in accordance with our deep, driving desire. It is this desire at the time of death that determines what our next life is to be. We will come back to earth to work out the satisfaction of that desire. But not those who are free from desire. They are free because all their desires have found fulfillment in the self. They do not die like the others, but realizing Brahman, they merge in Brahman. Those who realize the self enter into the peace that brings complete self-control and perfect patience. They see themselves in everyone and everyone in themselves. The fourth is the superconscious state called turiya, neither inward nor outward, beyond the senses and the intellect, in which there is none other than the Lord. He is the supreme goal of life. He is infinite peace and love, realize him. Turiya is represented by Om. Realize the self, the shining goal of life. If you do not, there is only darkness. See the self in all, and go beyond death. Well, have you renounced these passing pleasures so dear to the senses and turned your back on the way of the world which makes mankind forget the goal of life? Far apart are wisdom and ignorance. The first leads one to self-realization, the second makes one more and more estranged from his real self. It is but few who hear about the self. Fewer still dedicate their lives to its realization. Wonderful is the one who speaks about the self. Rare are they who make it the supreme goal of their lives. Blessed are they who, through an illumined teacher, attain self-realization. The truth of the self cannot come through one who has not realized that he is the self. The intellect cannot reveal the self beyond its duality of subject and object. They who see themselves in all and all in them help others through spiritual osmosis to realize the self, themselves. The wise, realizing through meditation the timeless self, beyond all perception, hidden in the cave of the heart, leave pain and pleasure far behind. Those who know they are neither body nor mind but the immortal self, the divine principle of existence, find the source of all joy and live in joy abiding. I will give you the word all the scriptures glorify, all spiritual disciplines express, to attain which aspirants lead a life of sense mastery. It is Om. This symbol of the Godhead is the highest. Realizing it, one finds complete fulfillment of all one's longings. It is of the greatest support to all seekers. Those in whose heart's Om reverberates unceasingly are indeed blessed and deeply loved as one who is the Self. Hidden in the heart of every creature exists the Self, subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. They go beyond sorrow who extinguish their self-will and behold the glory of the Self through the grace of the Lord of Love. The Self cannot be known by anyone who desists not from unrighteous ways, controls not his senses, stills not his mind, and practices not meditation. The senses derive from objects of sense perception, sense objects from mind, mind from intellect, intellect from ego, ego from indifferentiated consciousness, and consciousness from Brahman. Brahman is the first cause and last refuge. Brahman, the hidden Self in everyone, does not shine forth. He is revealed only to those who keep their mind one pointed on the Lord of Love, Self, and thus develop a superconscious manner of knowing. Meditation enables them to go deeper and deeper into consciousness, from the world of words to the world of thoughts, then beyond thoughts to wisdom in the Self. If one fails to realize Brahman in this life before the physical sheath is shed, he must again put on a body in the world of embodied creatures. There are two selves, the separate ego and the indivisible Atman. When one rises above I and me and mine, the Atman is revealed as one's real self. When all desires that surge in the heart are renounced, the mortal becomes immortal. As long as we think we are the ego, we feel attached and fall into sorrow. But realize that you are the Self, the Lord of Life, and you will be freed from sorrow. When you realize that you are the Self, Supreme Source of Light, Supreme Source of Love, you transcend the duality of life and enter into the unitive state. Those who dwell on and long for sense pleasure are born in a world of separateness. But let them realize they are the Self and all separateness will fall away. Not through discourse, not through the intellect, not even through study of the scriptures can the Self be realized. The Self reveals himself to the one who longs for the Self. Those who long for the Self with all their heart are chosen by the Self as his own. Not by the weak, not by the unearnest, not by those who practice wrong disciplines can the Self be realized. The Self reveals himself as the Lord of Love to the one who practices right disciplines. Before the world was created, the Self alone existed. Nothing whatever stirred. Then the Self thought, let me create the world. He brought forth all the worlds out of himself. Practice right conduct, learning and teaching. Be truthful always, learning and teaching. Master the passions, learning and teaching. Control the senses, learning and teaching. Strive for peace always, learning and teaching. Rouse the Kundalini, learning and teaching. Serve humanity, learning and teaching. Beget progeny, learning and teaching. Be truthful always, master the passions, learning and teaching. Learning and teaching are necessary for spiritual progress. This is the essence of essences, the highest, the eighth rung, venerated above all that human beings hold holy. Om is the Self of all. The universe comes forth from Brahman and will return to Brahman. Verily, all is Brahman. A person is what his deep desire is. It is our deepest desire in this life that shapes the life to come. So let us direct our deepest desires to realize the Self. The Self is sure, free from decay and death, free from hunger and thirst, and free from sorrow. The Self desires nothing that is not good, wills nothing that is not good. Seek and realize the Self. Those who seek and realize the Self fulfill all their desires and attain the goal supreme. It is truth the body is perishable, but within it dwells the imperishable Self. This body is subject to pleasure and pain. No one who identifies with the body can escape from pleasure and pain, but those who know they are not the body pass beyond pleasure and pain to live in abiding joy. The world is the wheel of God, turning round and round with all living creatures upon its rim. The world is the river of God, flowing from Him and flowing back to Him. On this ever-revolving wheel of being, the individual self goes round and round through life after life, believing itself to be a separate creature, until it sees its identity with the Lord of Love and attains immortality in the indivisible whole. The Lord of Love holds in his hand the world, composed of the changing and the changeless, the manifest and the unmanifest. The separate self, not yet aware of the Lord, goes after pleasure, only to become bound more and more. When it sees the Lord, there comes an end to its bondage. All is change in the world of the senses, but changeless is the Supreme Lord of Love. Meditate on him, be absorbed in him, wake up from the dream of separateness. Dedicate yourself to the Lord of Life, who is the cause of the cosmos. He will remove the cause of all your suffering and free you from the bondage of karma. Those who attain the supreme goal of life, realizing the self and passing beyond all sorrow, shine bright as a mirror which has been cleansed of dust. In the supreme climax of samadhi, they realize the presence of the Lord within their heart. Freed from impurities, they pass forever beyond birth and death. Not female, male, nor neuter as the self. As is the body, so is the gender. The self takes on a body, with desires, attachments, and delusions. The self is born again and again in new bodies to work out the karma of former lives. Hard to reach is the supreme goal of life, hard to describe and hard to abide in. They alone attain samadhi who have mastered their senses and are free from anger, free from self-will and free from likes and dislikes, without selfish bonds to people and things. Brahman cannot be realized by those who are subject to greed, fear, and anger. Brahman cannot be realized by those who are subject to the pride of name and fame or to the vanity of scholarship. Brahman cannot be realized by those who are enmeshed in life's duality. The mind may be said to be of two kinds, pure and impure. Driven by the senses, it becomes impure, but with the senses under control, the mind becomes pure. It is the mind that frees us or enslaves. Driven by the senses, we become bound. Masters of the senses become free. Those who seek freedom must master their senses. When the mind is detached from the senses, one reaches the summit of consciousness. Mastery of the mind leads to wisdom. Practice meditation. Stop all vain talk. The highest state is beyond reach of thought, for it lies beyond all duality. Keep repeating the ancient mantra Om until it reverberates in your heart. He faces heat and cold, pleasure and pain, honor and dishonor with equal calm. He is not affected by pride, jealousy, status, joy or sorrow, greed, anger or infatuation, excitement, egoism, or other gods, for he knows he is neither body nor mind. The aspirant who is seeking the Lord must free himself from selfish attachments to people, money, and possessions. When his mind sheds every selfish desire, he becomes free from the duality of pleasure and pain and rules his senses. No more is he capable of ill will. No more is he subject to elation, for his senses come to rest in the self. Entering into the intuitive state, he attains the goal of evolution. Truly, he attains the goal of evolution. (46) The Sacred Paths of Yoga. Care not for criticism when you are on the right path. Yield not to flattery. Swami Sivananda. The purpose of this chapter is to provide a brief overview of the sacred paths of yoga. Yoga means union with God. There are, however, many ways that can be achieved. I will attempt to describe them briefly. Hatha Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Mantra Yoga, Kundalini, Laya, or Asparsha Yoga, Tantra Yoga, Taraka Yoga, Yantra Yoga, Kriya Yoga, Sabda or Nada Yoga, Sankirtan Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Agni Yoga, Eco Yoga, Shiva Yoga, Integral Yoga, Yoga of Synthesis, Mansa Yoga, Siddha Yoga, Lambika Yoga. There are 7 root races that make up this current world cycle, and there is a specific yoga connected with each time periods. Polarian, Hyperborean, and Lemurian, Hatha Yoga. Atlantean, Bhakti Yoga. Aryan, Raja Yoga. Maruvian, Agni Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. Paradisian, unknown. Although there are many minor paths and offshoots, these might be considered the major paths of yoga because Hatha Yoga correlates with the physical, Bhakti Yoga with the emotional, and Raja Yoga with the mental. All the yogas might be considered spokes of a wheel with God in the center. They all lead to the same place. I practice what might be termed a yoga of synthesis, which integrates all the yogas, extracting the best and finest teachings from each. Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga was the form of yoga focused upon in the Lemurian epoch of Earth's history. It is a yoga concerned with physical purification and training. Its goal is to bring the physical body into a perfect state of health so the soul has a fitting vehicle of expression to work through. Hatha Yoga embraces many practices, including physical postures and breathing exercises which also act upon the physical nervous system and the etheric body, which is considered a corollary aspect of the physical body. Hatha Yoga also helps to bring the vital energies of the physical and etheric bodies under control. This is an indispensable yoga for everyone to practice on some level, and it is intimately tied to passing the first initiation, which has to do with physical mastery. The word Hatha actually means the conjunction of the sun and the moon. It is these macrocosmic and microcosmic principles that must be balanced within the human body. There are 8 main steps in the process of Hatha Yoga: abstinence, observance, sitting postures, breath control, non-attachment to possessions. Hatha Yoga includes many muscular contractions which are called bandhas and physical gestures which are called mudras. It also includes the science of pratyahara, which has to do with learning to withdraw your senses from external objects, truly the key to effective meditation. If you would like to learn more about Hatha Yoga, there are many wonderful books on the market. 2 that I would particularly recommend are The Practice of Yoga by Swami Sivananda and Yoga, Mastering the Secrets of Matter and the Universe by Alain Danielou. Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga was the yoga of the Atlantean period which dealt with emotional attunement. For this reason it is the yoga of love and devotion. It has also been, to a great extent, a major yoga of the Piscean age. It is a good yoga for you if you are identified with your emotional body. Its method of reintegration with Source is love. There are 9 steps in Bhakti Yoga: listening, singing of praise, meditation, worship of the feet, ritual worship, prostration, being a slave to God, being a friend, self-surrender. 2 well-known spiritual masters who seem to embody this devotional aspect of yoga are Paramahansa Yogananda and Sathya Sai Baba. 2 forms of Bhakti Yoga are the way of passionate attachment and the way of transcendent love. The Angirasa Deva Mimamsa Sutra says, that form of devotion which makes use of emotions and brings joy and peace is called the way of passionate attachment. The way of transcendent love sees the whole universe, animate and inanimate, as being pervaded by divinity. It says, "Thou art that." This way is summed up as follows: he who, with his whole being, sees divinity in all existing things and all things in divinity, stands highest among the devotees of the Lord. Followers of Bhakti Yoga often personalize God, as the followers of Krishna and Rama did. They often are very involved with rituals, flowers, incense, beautiful buildings, and other forms that aid in cultivating love for God, rather than being interested in intellectually understanding God. As you can see, these yogas relate strongly to the 4-body system and how you relate to and identify with your physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies. Bhakti yoga is also very much involved with service. If you are on the spiritual path, it is essential for you to practice some form of bhakti yoga. Otherwise you are disowning your emotional body in your pursuit of God realization. No form of yoga is better than another, although different yogas suit certain people better than do others at certain stages in their lives and spiritual evolution. Bhakti yoga is the way of the heart, which is the most important spiritual practice of all. Raja yoga. It has been said that the purpose of Hatha yoga is to make Raja yoga possible. Raja yoga cannot be achieved without the training of Hatha yoga, and a Bhakti yoga, too, for that matter. Raja yoga is the yoga of the Aryan age. For this reason it is the yoga that deals with controlling the mind and concentrating, which is the main lesson of this current root race. It is through concentration that you gain knowledge and mastery of all things. There are 15 main steps in Raja Yoga. Abstinence. Observance, I am the principle of all things, the Brahman. Renunciation. Silence. Solitude. Proper use of time. Postures. Root contraction, Mula Bandha. Strengthening the body. Straightening the body. Spiritual sight. Breath control. Pratyahara, seeing divinity in all perceptible forms brings delight to the mind and its faculties. Know this as the withdrawal which should be practiced every moment. Contemplation, the one changeless thought, I am the principle, the Brahman, with no other notion, is known under the name of contemplation and is the giver of supreme bliss. The Upanishads. Identification, when the very notion of contemplation is forgotten, this is known as identification. The Upanishads. Raja Yoga means royal yoga, and it refers specifically to the yoga system of Patanjali. For an in-depth study of the teachings of Patanjali, see the chapter on his Yoga Sutras. I have found Patanjali's teachings to be very profound. It is a system of study somewhat similar to A Course in Miracles, even though it was written over 5,000 years ago. Raja Yoga is especially relevant now because of the current period of planetary history. Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga achieves union with God through right action and through service. Sai Baba's famous quote applies here, "Hands that help are holier than lips that pray." Karma Yoga can also be summed up in a statement by Sri Bhagavan Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, "Worshipping him with proper actions, a man attains realization." One key to Karma Yoga is the performance of right action and service for its own sake, without consideration of the immediate or apparent results. Karma Yoga literally means action yoga. It consists of the sacred work of performing your daily activities in harmony with the soul's wishes and desires. All actions are to be done with an attitude of self-surrender and with no regard for the fruit of those actions, no egoistic attachments. You could say that Mahatma Gandhi perfectly embodied the ideals of Karma Yoga. It is the gospel of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. A Karma Yogi is an instrument of God in the affairs of the world. It is essential to integrate Karma Yoga along with the other yogas into your daily life. Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is the yoga of the philosopher and thinker who wants to go beyond the visible, material reality. The Jnana Yogi finds God through knowledge. Jnana Yoga is summed up in the Upanishads by the following statement, "In the method of reintegration through knowledge, the mind is ever bound to the ultimate end of existence, which is liberation. This method leads to all attainments and is ever auspicious." Jnana Yoga teaches 7 stages of knowledge. 4 states of mind and 7 obstacles have to be faced. The 4 states of mind are the dispersed state, the past approach, the grasped state, the merging state. The 7 obstacles are goodwill, reflection, subtlety of mind, perception of reality, freedom from leaning toward the world, disappearance of visible forms, The unmanifest state. Jnana Yoga is the path of insight or wisdom based on what Vedanta refers to as higher knowledge rather than lower knowledge. Dwal Khul might refer to this as the difference between the knowledge of the higher mind and the knowledge of the concrete mind. The Vedas support Jnana Yoga, which is based on the spiritual concept of non-dualism. Jnana Yoga is the path of self-realization through Gnostic understanding that teaches the ability to discern the real from the unreal. To the Jnana Yogi, willpower and inspired reason are the two guiding principles by which he can attain enlightenment. Jnana Yoga has been described as a straight but steep course. Vedanta lists 6 principles of Jnana Yoga that lead to liberation. Discrimination. Renunciation. The 3 accomplishments: tranquility, sense restraint, actions totally in harmony with God. Endurance. Mental collectedness. Faith. Other practices of Jnana Yoga include listening, redemption, the sacred teachings, and pondering on the importance of meditation. Jnana Yoga, in essence, is the cultivation of the eye of wisdom. Mantra Yoga. Mantra Yoga finds union with God through the proper use of speech and sound. It is the power of the word to create or destroy that Mantra Yoga emphasizes. It utilizes the focused intent to make every word you speak be in harmony with God and with your own soul. Mantra Yoga also uses mantras as an indispensable part of the practice. In the East, the mantra yogi usually uses Om, Soham, Om Namah Shivaya, or Ram, Rim as his favorite mantra. The most important mantra is the syllable Om. It is considered the greatest of all mantras. After that, there is the Gayatri mantra, which is considered the mantra of eternal wisdom in the Vedas. Rhythmic repetition of a mantra is called japa, which is why this type of yoga has also been called japa yoga. One of the greatest proponents of this practice is His Holiness, Lord Sai Baba. He considers the constant repetition of the name of God and the visualizing of your favorite form of God to be an indispensable spiritual practice. Most spiritual teachers in the East and West integrate some form of mantra yoga into their teachings. The practice of mantra yoga requires constant vigilance over every thought you think and every word you speak, for every word you speak in your daily life, in truth, is a mantra and a word of power. There are different kinds of japa. Daily japa, which is usually done in the morning and evening. Circumstantial japa, which is usually done on festival days. Japa that is done for some specific desired goal. Forbidden japa, which is done without discipline and with wrong pronunciation. Japa that is done for penance. Moving japa, which is done through the day and which is what Sai Baba has recommended. Voice japa, which is done out loud for others to hear, if appropriate. Whispered japa. Bee japa, in which the mantra is murmured so it sounds like the hum of a bee. The lips and tongue do not move and the eyes are usually closed. Mental japa, which is done solely in the mind and is an indispensable method to use in your daily life. The uninterrupted japa, which is for those who have renounced the world. Japa is done continuously. When tired, the yogi meditates, and when tired of meditating, he goes back to japa. When tired of both, he thinks of the Supreme Self. Japa that is done with beads or a rosary. There are 16 steps in mantra yoga. Devotion. Purity. Posture. Observance of the calendar, which is based on an astrological understanding and which defines celebrations, fasts, and so on. The ways of conduct. Concentration. The search for the inner divine countries. These inner countries are considered the abodes of deities, masters, and gurus on the inner plane. Breath control. Gesture. Water offering. Fire offering. Ritual sacrifice, fruit. Ritual worship, which usually utilizes scents, flowers, incense, a lamp, and food of some kind. repetition of mantras, words of power, and names of God. Contemplation. Identification, samadhi, which is achieved when the meaning of the mantra has been realized and the mind dissolves into the deity of the mantra. There becomes no separation between the seeker and that which is sought. With identification, the seeker has achieved his goal. Kundalini, Laya, or Asparsha Yoga. Kundalini Yoga is the method by which certain spiritual practices are utilized to purposely and consciously raise the coiled energy at the base of the spine up through the chakras to the third eye and crown chakras in an attempt to achieve self-realization. This type of yoga has also been called Asparsha Yoga. It utilizes 8 basic steps: observances and abstinences, purification, courage, steadiness, endurance, subtlety, direct evidence, thoughtless identification. It also utilizes certain specific breathing exercises, mudras, and bandhas in the process of awakening the Kundalini. I have written in great detail about the practice of Kundalini Yoga in Soul Psychology, so I will not repeat myself here. I do want to emphasize that the forced awakening of the Kundalini is a very dangerous proposition unless it is done under the guidance of a qualified, self-realized teacher, which, in truth, is hard to find. The raising of the Kundalini is important, however, it will activate quite naturally and at the proper time in the well-balanced, committed, integrated disciple on the path, no matter what path you are following. Trying to force the awakening of the Kundalini is literally playing with fire. This is not a type of yoga to experiment with haphazardly on your own. Raised prematurely, this energy will activate and then shoot out of your lower chakras and create worlds of problems. Before practicing this form of yoga, you must have mastery over your energies. I would say it shouldn't be focused upon until after the 3rd initiation at the earliest, and again, only with a qualified spiritual teacher. Tantra Yoga. Tantra Yoga seeks to find union with the divine through the spiritual use of sexuality. It seeks to use sexual energy as a means of attaining self-mastery. Tantric philosophy states that you can achieve the same result through celibacy or through sexual union. It is the spiritual science of learning to raise sexual energy up the chakras while making love with your partner or spouse. Tantra Yoga embodies the concept that sexual energy must be controlled, mastered, and utilized, not run away from. Sexuality is seen as a sacred energy to be used, but only under the guidance of the soul, not the lower self. In Soul Psychology I have dedicated a chapter to the spiritual aspects of sexuality, so I will not repeat myself here. It is my opinion, however, that this is a kind of yoga that almost all the people on this planet need to come to terms with. Tantra Yoga provides a midpoint between the 2 extremes of celibacy and being run by the carnal lower self. Tantra Yoga is the spiritual science of how to properly utilize your sexual energy in the service of God. Many traditions and fundamentalist religions consider sexuality a bad thing, which just isn't true. When used properly, it can accelerate your path to God realization. Taraka Yoga. Taraka Yoga is based on the non-dualist philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. It is thought to have been started by Shankara. The word Taraka actually means that which delivers. Taraka Yoga delivers the practitioner to the unconditioned reality of the Absolute. This is achieved through the recognition of there being only one single being living in the infinite universe whose name is Brahman, or Atman. The goal of Taraka Yoga is to convert your ordinary consciousness to a continuous awareness of this absolute reality. It is achieved, to a great extent, through a series of exercises in which light phenomena play a decisive role. The inner light is produced by a technique known as Shambhavi Mudra. The yogi fixes his or her attention on the third eye and learns to see and experience the light phenomena of the inner dimensions of reality. There are discernible stages of development in this yogic path which have been loosely designated as the inner sign, the external sign, and the intermediate sign. There is a whole science of these lights and sounds. If you are interested in this form of yoga, I recommend reading a book called Sacred Paths by George Feuerstein. Yantra Yoga. Yantra Yoga is the path of union with God. Thorough geometric visualization. A yantra is a geometric design. They are highly efficient tools for contemplation, concentration, and meditation. This type of yoga might also be called mandala yoga. The Buddhists are masters of this type of yoga, as can be seen in their mandalas, icons, tankas, and sand paintings. The American Indians used this type of yoga, also. The Kabbalistic tree of life might be put in this category as well. By tuning into the different aspects of a yantra, you can tap into certain deities or creative force centers in the universe. The yantra is like a microcosmic picture of the macrocosm. It is a focusing point and an outer and inner doorway. The yantras are often focused on a specific deity. They can be drawn on paper, wood, metal, or on the earth itself, or they can be three-dimensional. The yantra provides a focal point that is a window into the absolute. The idea is to make the yantra so real, inwardly and outwardly, that it becomes alive. In that way it absorbs the practitioner's complete attention, and he can no longer tell if the yantra is within himself or if he is within the yantra. The most celebrated yantra in India is the Shri Yantra, or auspicious wheel. It is a symbol of the entire cosmos that serves to remind the practitioner of the non-difference between subject and object. Shri Yantra. Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga is the form taught by Babaji and Paramahansa Yogananda. I have written about it in the Complete Ascension Manual in the chapter called, Babaji, the Yogi Christ, so I am not going to repeat the same information here. I will say, however, that Paramahansa Yogananda has referred to it as the airplane method to God. I have been initiated into this type of yoga and have found it to be extraordinarily valuable. Sabda, or Nada, Yoga. Sabda, or Nada, Yoga is the method of achieving union with God through sound. One of its greatest proponents was Kabir, the poet saint. Ekankar is a modern-day mystery school based upon Sabda Yoga. The practice of this kind of yoga has to do with learning to tune in and listen to the inner sounds that emanate from the different dimensions of reality. In the chapter on soul travel in this book I have listed these sounds. Sabda Yoga also includes intoning certain mantras and sacred sounds that allow you to soul travel and attune to the dimensions from which the mantras come. This sublime form of yoga is the basis of the Sikh religion. Sankirtan Yoga. Sankirtan Yoga seeks to find union with the divine through the singing and chanting of bhajans, or devotional songs, which are also called Sankirtan. Sai Baba is one of the strongest proponents of this kind of yoga. Not only are the songs filled with the sacred names of God, but they have very beautiful melodies which allow the emotional body of the practitioner to get involved. Practitioners of Bhakti Yoga would especially love this type of yoga. The joy and bliss that come from singing devotional songs with a loving, supportive spiritual community are awe-inspiring. I have a whole set of devotional songs from the Sai Baba Foundation and I play them constantly. Sai Baba has said that the singing of devotional songs is the best spiritual practice for getting rid of the blemish of ego. Devotional songs are a way of practicing mantra yoga and japa yoga, but doing it with a melody makes it more enjoyable. Temptation doesn't arise when your mind is constantly affirming, chanting, and singing your love, devotion, and praise of God. Ashtanga Yoga and Agni Yoga. There is not a lot of information available on Ashtanga Yoga, but it is an important path of yoga because Dwal Khul has said that Asantanga Yoga is the yoga for the coming Maruvian root race. Theosophical literature has designated Agni Yoga, or Fire Yoga, as the yoga of the next coming root race. It is for this reason that I have put the two together. Ashtanga Yoga is a type of power yoga. The full name is Ashtanga Vinyasa, and it is a very active, movement-oriented form of yoga. Agni Yoga was made famous by Nicholas Roerich, who in this century channeled a whole series of books on the subject from Ascended Master El Morya. I would guide anyone who is interested in this yoga to those books. The teachings were a dispensation much like those Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey channeled, except that they are probably more of the first ray than the second ray, since El Morya is the Chohan of the first ray. Eco-yoga. Eco-yoga is one of the newer yogas. It is the yoga of ecological and environmental sanctification and respect. It sees all life as being interconnected and interdependent. It is, hence, the study and practice of the interrelatedness among minerals, plants, animals, humans, and the environment. This yoga might be one of the most important of all because if humans don't learn to respect and sanctify the Earth Mother and all the life that lives upon her, we will destroy the school that allows us to practice all the other yogas. I have written about the need to take care of the environment and work cooperatively with the nature kingdoms. God lives as much in the earth, a river, a mountain, a city, a plant, a mineral, an insect, an animal, in the air, the forests, in the physical body as he does in higher dimensions of reality. Not to sanctify the environment is literally to deface and destroy God's physical body. You wouldn't do that to your own physical body. Why would you show so little respect to his? The true spiritual path brings heaven to earth and recognizes the material universe as one of God's most beautiful and treasured heavens. Shiva Yoga. Shiva Yoga is for those seekers who wish to merge with the Shiva aspect of the Hindu trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Shiva Yoga has 5 parts. Knowledge of Shiva. Devotion to Shiva. Contemplation of Shiva. Observances of the austerities connected with Shiva. Ritual worship of Shiva. Integral Yoga. Integral yoga is the term given to the yoga created by Sri Aurobindo, the self-realized master from India who lived earlier in this century. I am not well versed on his particular slant on the Vedic teachings, but I have always very much respected his contribution. I am reminded of a story about him that occurred, I believe, on November 24, 1923. He was meditating when he received a vision that Krishna had incarnated into the physical world on the previous day. The previous day, Sathya Sai Baba had incarnated into a baby's body in southern India. One of the integral teachings of Sri Aurobindo's yoga was his commitment to political action as well as to his inner spiritual work. In this regard he was more balanced than some of the Eastern spiritual traditions of non-involvement with the material world. He developed a lot of his teachings about integral yoga with his partner who was referred to as the Mother. If you are interested in studying his teachings in detail, I recommend reading his 2-volume set of books called Letters on Yoga. He was a prolific writer and one of his teachers was Sri Sankara, the great Hindu master who lived in the 8th century. Yoga of Synthesis. The Yoga of Synthesis is the form of yoga I recommend. It integrates all forms of yoga, all spiritual paths, all religions. It is an eclectic and universalistic path that gleans the best from each form of yoga and integrates it all into one cohesive, unified whole. This is not to say that you might not emphasize a particular path during a certain phase of your life, or even during a certain incarnation. In the larger context, however, all paths are one, they are just different spokes on the same wheel, and one path of yoga is no better than any other. They are all important and all the knowledge they embody is essential for full and total realization of God. I am grateful to the following authors for the information in their excellent books. Ronald Beasley, Yoga of the Inward Path. Alain Danielou, Yoga. George Feuerstein, Sacred Paths. 47. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. By intense devotion to Ishvara, God, knowledge of Ishvara is gained. Patanjali. The Yoga Sutras were given sometime between 820 BC and 200 BC. The God-realized Saint Patanjali was the first to write down the teachings, previously, they had been passed down orally. For this reason he is regarded as the founder of the science of Raja Yoga, the kingly science of the soul. His teachings are of particular importance because this is the Aryan age, which holds the focus of mastery of the mind. Raja Yoga deals with the right use of the mind as an instrument for the soul and, hence, for self-realization. It helps to bring about the mastery of the mental body and will lead humanity to the fifth initiation. In Alice Bailey's book Light of the Soul, The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, she says that the 3 books every student should have on hand for study are the Bhagavad Gita, the New Testament, and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The Yoga Sutras are a step-by-step system of gradually unfolded spiritual development. They remind me a little bit of A Course in Miracles by Master Jesus. Each sutra is a one-sentence aphorism or teaching. There are 195 sutras in all, divided into 4 books. Book 1 deals with the problem of union. Book 2 deals with the steps to union. Book 3 deals with union achieved and its results. Book 4 deals with illumination. An interesting fact made known by Dwal Khul in the Alice Bailey books is that these Yoga Sutras are the basic teachings of the Trans-Himalayan school to which many of the masters of wisdom belong, certainly including Dwal Khul, Kuthumi, and El Morya. The Yoga Sutras form one of the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy. The Upanishads, the wisdom teachings of the Vedas, uphold the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as being among the 6 systems containing the most efficacious methods for achieving direct perception of truth. The yoga system of Patanjali has been called the Eightfold Path that leads to the final goal of Kaivalya, absoluteness, in which the yogi realizes truth beyond all intellectual apprehension. I would like to introduce you to these sutras. This graded series of lessons is one of the most valuable courses in spiritual development I have ever found. For the purposes of this chapter I have extracted what I consider to be the most valuable sutras and will share them with you in the order in which they are presented by Patanjali. After some I have provided a short commentary, otherwise, the meaning is straightforward and self-explanatory. After reading this chapter you will have an excellent sense of the overall teachings. This translation of Patanjali's sutras is that of Dwal Khul in the Alice Bailey book The Light of the Soul.